Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar, Start Your Social Enterprise the Right Way, a panel discussion about social enterprise and the legal and regulatory environment. We are going to get started right away here, so thank you all for joining us. My name is Kristina Roberts. I am the Legal Initiatives Manager at IntegralOrg, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's conversation. A little bit more about IntegralOrg. IntegralOrg is a go-to problem solver for Alberta nonprofits and charities. We offer a comprehensive suite of services that build organizational capacity. We problem solve with organizations through workshops, phone consultations, one-on-one clinics, and in-depth organizational development projects in the foundational areas of governance, legal compliance, financial management, strategic planning, change management, and risk management. If you have a question about social enterprise or about any aspect of nonprofit governance and management, please give us a call. We're happy to chat, offer ideas, recommend solutions, and just be a listening ear. At IntegralOrg, our mission is yours. Before we get started, I'd like to take some time to acknowledge that what we call Alberta is the traditional and ancestral territory of many peoples presently subject to Treaties 6, 7, and 8. Namely the Blackfoot Confederacy, Kainai, Piikani, and Siksika, the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney Nakoda, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Métis people of Alberta. This includes the Métis settlements and the 6 regions of the Métis Nation of Alberta within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We respect the histories, languages, and cultures of all the First Peoples of Canada who have lived on and cared for these lands for generations. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on and work on today. So now to introduce our panelists. First, we have Kate Benetos. She's the Director of Finance with Chrysalis, an Alberta Society for Citizens with Disabilities. Chrysalis is a registered charity based out of Edmonton, and it has a mission to provide personalized services to empower individuals with disabilities to accomplish their employment, volunteer, and recreational goals. Chrysalis benefits from the operation of 2 social enterprises, Chrysalis Woods and Plastics LP and CRISP LP. Next, we have Jane Bisbee, the Executive Director of the Social Enterprise Fund. The Social Enterprise Fund is a collaborative initiative of the City of Edmonton and the Edmonton Community Foundation. The Social Enterprise Fund provides financial support in the form of loans to organizations across Alberta that are developing a social enterprise. Our next panelist is Diane Hodgins, the Chief Financial Officer of Shorefast Foundation. Shorefast Foundation is a registered charity based out of Newfoundland that has a mission to build cultural and economic resilience on Fogo Island, Newfoundland, and to serve community well-being by building and sharing new models of economic development that are based upon the inherent cultural and physical assets of a place. Shorefast benefits from the operation of 3 social enterprises: Fogo Island Inn, the Woodshop on Fogo Island, and Fogo Island Fish. Last but not least, we have Yvonne Chenier. Yvonne is IntegralOrg's General Counsel and one of the co-founders of the organization. She brings more than 40 years of experience as a lawyer advising those in the philanthropic, nonprofit, and social enterprise sectors. So just before we dive into the conversation with our panelists, I'd like to just set the stage here. As people that are familiar with this space know, there's no official definition of social enterprise, so the term can be kind of difficult to nail down. So I thought it'd be helpful to just start with a definition. At IntegralOrg, we rely on the definition from Employment and Social Development Canada, which defines a social enterprise as an innovative business model, whether not-for-profit or for-profit, that pursues a social, cultural, or environmental mission through the sale of goods and services, with the majority of net profits directed back to its mission. So as alluded to in that definition, there's no designated legal structure for a social enterprise, and they can operate in many different forms inside for-profit corporations, nonprofits, registered charities, cooperatives, or any number of other hybrid and mixed entities. There are pros and cons to each structure, And selecting the most appropriate structure depends on a number of factors, including your mission, vision, business plan, and other management considerations. For today, we're going to focus mostly on social enterprises that are associated with nonprofits and charities. Social enterprise is often pointed to as a pathway towards financial sustainability for the sector, and it may look especially attractive right now in light of the impacts of the pandemic. But it's important to keep in mind that social enterprise isn't right for every organization, and it involves the same risks inherent with any business startup. There's also additional risks for nonprofits and charities since they're restricted in many ways by legislation and the tax regime. Today, we're going to find out what is possible and what kind of opportunities can be pursued by enterprising nonprofits and charities. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up our panelists now. Stop sharing my screen. All right. I'd like to start with Yvonne. So Yvonne, I mentioned that there are some legal restrictions around the ability of charities and nonprofits to run social enterprises. So I was wondering if you could just give us a brief overview of what some of those restrictions are.
Thank you, Kristina, and welcome everyone. Yes, I can give you a very high level in a couple of minutes of the restrictions for social entrepreneurs because they generally come from the same place as most restrictions come from in life for all of us. The legal and the regulatory environment that we all live in Canada. So, for example, the legal restrictions come from the statutes or the legislation that you are formed or incorporated under, the one you choose your social enterprise to operate under. And then the regulatory restrictions are the biggest considerations, I think, and they come mostly, as Kristina alluded, from the Income Tax Act, which governs many things, and other things that have impact depending on the kind of activities that your social enterprise does, such as health, privacy, occupational health and safety, human rights legislation, and on and on and on in the regulatory world. So assuming that your social enterprise involves some sort of commercial activity where goods and services are being sold, consider some of these very high-level thoughts. If you run your social enterprise through a business corporation structure, then all the usual rules and regulations that apply to any business will apply to you, regardless of how you're doing the activity or how social you think your mission is. The federal and the provincial governments have many rules that impact business activities. If you run your social enterprise through a nonprofit, you know you have the legislation that you incorporated your organization under, and that's the main focus of what your legal restrictions come from, because some legislation does not permit any kind of commercial activities to occur inside of a nonprofit, and some are silent. So you need to know that first. And then the big hurdle in the Income Tax Act, a strict nonprofit gets its tax exemption under Section 149 sub 1 of the Income Tax Act, which unfortunately is not as clear as it could be for some social entrepreneurs when they look at whether the activity they are doing can be tax exempt or not. So, for example, Section 149 sub 1 sub L of the Income Tax Act talks about the general miscellaneous exemption for the kinds of nonprofits we encounter in the social enterprise world. And all of those organizations to be tax exempt have to be organized and operated exclusively for social welfare, civic improvement, pleasure or recreation, or for any other purpose except profit. So try to interpret that. The CRA has many interpretations that relate to this specific section, and unfortunately, the regulatory environment for nonprofits carrying on profit-making enterprises is not really clear at this time. And finally, if you run your social enterprise through an entity that has been granted registered charitable status under the Income Tax Act by the Canada Revenue Agency, then you have a special status under the Income Tax Act, of course, but there are very special rules that go with that you need to follow to ensure that your social enterprise activity that you are doing actually is directly related to the charitable purposes under which you were granted charitable status. So that's a very high level. It's interesting that many passionate social entrepreneurs start this process without really understanding the legal and the regulatory implications in the environment that their passion has led them to. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Yvonne. That was a really good overview. I know that there's so many more details to get into, but we're limited for time here. So that was really very good. So Yvonne mentioned for charities that a business has to be related to the charitable purposes. And as I mentioned, both Chrysalis and Surefast are registered charities. So I was just wondering if Diane and Kate, if you could comment very briefly on how you set up your social enterprise, like what the structure is, so that it doesn't compromise the charitable status. Can we start with Diane on that one?
So we have two legal entities. So we have the charity, as Kristina mentioned, Surefast Foundation, and then we have a separate for-profit company, Surefast Social Enterprises, Inc. It's a federally incorporated company and then registered in the provinces of Newfoundland and Ontario, because that is our fish business is primarily servicing Ontario, where our other businesses are primarily servicing and the services delivered in Newfoundland. And yeah, just at a very high level, we have a unanimous shareholder agreement between the two. There is a lot of crossover in the bylaws and in the articles between the two in terms of making sure that it is all in all business activity is separate, but in service of that larger charitable mandate.
Great, thanks, Diane. And Kate, how about with the Chrysalis social enterprises? How were those set up in interaction with the charitable entity?
Yeah, I'll give you more background, I think, a bit later on. But in terms of how we are structured today legally, so I'll kind of start at the top and then work my way down to the actual the limited partnership, the social enterprise itself. So we have the Chrysalis Alberta Society for Citizens with Disabilities, which, as you mentioned, is a registered charity. And the beneficiary of Chrysalis Wisdom Plastics Trust, which is one of the partners in that limited partnership. So this trust owns a 99.9% interest in the Chrysalis Wisdom Plastics LP, which is Chrysalis's flagship social enterprise, the first one that was ever started. So, and then the other 0.01% interest is held by Chrysalis Wisdom Plastics General Partnership, the other partner in that limited partnership. So as a limited partner, the trust has no role in the operations of the partnership. But again, that 99.9% of the profits generated within the limited partnership, Chrysalis Wisdom Plastics LP, flow to the trust, and then as its beneficiary are then passed on to the society at the Board of Trustees' discretion. So the limited partnership itself is registered as a for-profit entity with its own business number.
Okay. Yeah, both very interesting structures that these two organizations have. So Jane, with the Social Enterprise Fund, we know there's many different legal structures that organizations can choose from. So could you tell us whether the structure of a social enterprise impacts their ability to get funding from the Social Enterprise Fund or other funders, and what that kind of looks like?
Yeah, what we're dealing with is financing tools. So we are essentially an investor who uses either loans or equity investments because we deal with any corporate structure across the board. I'm going to say something that is a couple of things that are probably a little surprising. One, I'm not a lawyer, so all this stuff makes my head hurt as much as it does many other people's. But to me, corporate structure is incredibly important when we're looking at an investment, but not probably for the reason that you're thinking. To us, and to me, it's really important that the right corporate structure be in place to permit the management and the timely management and the business management that needs to happen. To me, that's far more important than the whole legal possibility. And people come to me and want to talk about corporate structure. I usually say, I want to know how this business is going to operate and what it's going to do and what you want it to look like at the end. And is the management structure that you're putting in place actually robust enough to be able to deal with the day-to-day, in-time, real-world decisions that you're going to have to make while you're running a business? The other thing is that I think there's a whole lot of obsession around defining a social enterprise and getting the corporate structure, talking about that, because to me, a social enterprise is not a thing anymore. I'm sorry, I've stopped thinking about it as a noun. I now think of social enterprise as a verb. It's a way of being and a way of bringing into your organization all of the tools and tricks you can learn from the business world to be able to operate with more efficiently within a non-profit world. If you, I mean, rule number one is that, and every nonprofit organization knows this, you don't have more income than outgo, you don't get to play, right? You need profit. You must have more money coming in than it costs you to run the business, or you don't get to do this. So to me, the most useful thing that social enterprise has taught me, and I came from your position, I've sat on boards of not-for-profits, I've run both local and national not-for-profit organizations from a staff point of view. You need to understand how to run this thing as a business. And to me, that's what social enterprise is about. It's about the tricks and tools to be able to do that efficiently. Now, where it comes to, okay, I'm going to sit down with Yvonne and I'm going to talk about what the best legal structure is, it comes out of how does the management work? What is your revenue stream? If, for example, your primary customer is a government agency that will only deal with a not-for-profit, well, I guess you kind of decided what your legal structure is going to be, right? You're going to have to be a not-for-profit to actually work with that customer. If a CRA magic wand, better known as a charitable tax status, is important to your life because a major part of your revenue has to come through that kind of mechanism, then you better sit down with Yvonne and be very careful that you understand all those CRA rules. It's a matter of understanding what your operation is going to be. And I'll stop talking there because I've probably taken up too much time.
Thanks, Jane. Very interesting perspective there. I think, yeah, just having that innovative lens, thinking about social enterprise as a verb is very important. And I think probably Kate and Diane can relate to having the management considerations kind of in some ways dictate what the best structure is. So I'm wondering if, Kate, maybe you want to talk a bit about that and what your journey was with Chrysalis and coming to the limited partnership structure and what kind of led you down that path.
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned in my intro there, that we, Chrysalis Woods and Plastics has evolved over the years. So, it actually started out as a program of the society. It was not a separate limited partnership. So this started back in the mid-1970s, and really it was a way to provide vocational skills to Chrysalis's client base, which is adults with disabilities. So it was very much part of our mission. However, because, the products that are being manufactured were ultimately being sold on the open market and competing with other plastic bottle and wooden pallet manufacturers, it was quickly realized that operating the entity as a business for profit could provide another advantage to Chrysalis by kind of filling in the gaps left between, government funding contracts and individual donations, which the society is set up to do. So in other words, the profits generated by the manufacturing businesses could be cycled back into the society's operations to help sustain existing programs and services, as well as finance new programs and services that are being delivered to Chrysalis's own clients. So, as has been mentioned, of course, the CRA has pretty strict rules in place regarding the nature of the mission and purpose of a registered charity like Chrysalis. And so generating profits is not on that list of qualifying criteria for us to maintain our charitable status. So in 2008, upon receiving some good outside legal advice from a firm who is well-versed in the Canadian Income Tax Act, Chrysalis's board of directors at that time decided to spin off the manufacturing arm of Chrysalis into what is known today as Chrysalis Woods and Plastics Limited Partnership, as a means, really of mitigating any risk to the society's charitable status and to contain liability only, to within the separate business entity itself. So again, they created the general partner, Chrysalis Woods and Plastics General Partnership, which has again a 0.01 stake in the limited partnership. to fulfill that role of the general partner in this scenario, and a trust, which has the other 99.9% stake in the limited partnership. So in accordance with the Partnership Act, the trust acts as a limited partner and has, again, no role in the operations of the LP and is protected from liability. And because the general partner is an incorporated entity, its owners are also protected from personal liability. So as the trust receives 99.9% of the LP's operating income, it has to file a T3 tax return each year, indicating the amount of income to distribute to its beneficiary, which again is the charity society. So the trust always elects to distribute 100% of its income to the beneficiary, so that no income is actually taxed inside the trust. So the income gets taxed in the hands of the society, which of course is tax exempt by nature of its charitable status. So in this way, the limited partnership is unrestricted in the amount of operating income it can generate. And just as a side note, it is managed by senior leaders with considerable business expertise for strategic growth and market competitiveness. Very much it's run like a for-profit entity, and society then enjoys the maximum possible financial benefit thanks to this setup.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's a very innovative structure, and I think it's quite unique. It sounds like it's kind of the best of both worlds with the charity and the for-profit and the tax kind of setup. So you mentioned that you got some legal advice to structure yourselves in that way. I'm wondering, Yvonne, if you can shed some light on why you think maybe Chrysalis was given that advice to set up as a limited partnership as opposed to, say, a corporation.
Well, because it was the best advice with the information that the society had at the time, and it led to setting up the most efficient form of a social enterprise to prepare for any future regulatory changes. All of the commercial activities are in proper business structures, and the best part of it is that all of the revenue and profits and wonderful results and fruits and labors of all the business flow directly or indirectly right into the charity, which is the society. So it's hard to just off the top just say why a certain structure was chosen. I mean, this is in Alberta as well, so that the regulatory and legal environment in Alberta have a place to play in this planning. But the best thing that was pointed out is that the very strong leadership was needed to take the individuals involved through this change and make these decisions, and today carry on the good management of the structure overall, not to jeopardize anything. It's well set up for any regulatory change, I think, that might happen in the future in the sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Diane, I'm sure you can relate to Kate's story in some ways, and how they face challenges with the tax regime and also generating profit. So I was wondering if you could just share Surefast's story and how Surefast Social Enterprises Inc. was arrived at as a structure.
Yeah, for sure. So when I first joined the organization, I actually used to be the external auditor. So I've known Surefast for a long time because I used to be on the audit side and then came in as CFO several years ago. And we initially had a business trust. So similar kind of structure without all the partners, but we had a business trust where the sole beneficiary was Surefast. And so when I first joined, I started to dig into all of the structure and started having a lot of conversations around funding and getting insurance and what are all the operational needs to run this business. And the biggest hurdle that I had right off the bat is when I would start to talk to a bank or insurance company, they'd say, a business, what? You're a what? Like you're structured how? It was like I was talking from another planet. So one of the things I quickly came to realize is there's definitely a lack of understanding of what is a business trust. It's not a very familiar structure. So when you're talking to other professional service providers, be it like banks or insurance companies, or it's a bit of a foreign land. So that was sort of my first trigger that this may be a challenging structure to continue through as we grew, because there was a lot of questions. People are much more familiar with the for-profit. So that was definitely one of the things that we first started thinking about when I said, oh, we run a for-profit and a charity. People were like, got it. So that was a first signal for us to move into this transformation. Then there was various other reasons in terms of liability and risk with the trustees, and so I won't go into that. But we made the decision to move to, at the beginning, a holdco opco model. So we were going to have a for-profit holding company and then a series of operating companies. So Kristina mentioned we have three primary social businesses, and then we have a number that are in the hopper. So we were going to have Fogo Island Inc. and Woodshop Inc. And I started, incorporating all these. And then the governance piece came in, and the board started thinking, well, how many directors are there, and how many annual general meetings are we going to have, and how many advisories? And I started realizing all the administration very quickly, because we had set up a couple opcos, and it was just becoming back to sort of what Jane said. What is the operational focus for the most, to make sure what it is you want to do comes to light and management can operate? That is a great piece of advice, because we got tripped up in that initially. So we started on the holdco opco and quickly stopped with that. And so what we now have is a single for-profit operating company with a series of business divisions. So I run separate accounting for each. So I have a separate profit and loss, and a balance sheet for each of those businesses, so that the management can be evaluated on their own performance, but it is in one legal entity. And I can tell you that's been tremendously much more efficient in terms of navigating financing and all of our insurance and various other operational needs. So governance complexity definitely moved us down that way. In terms of also moving away from the trust, is I did find that there was a big part of our goal is to be, we're world-class offering, and we also want to be an example for how other businesses can operate. So this was something I also, I would say, Fogo Island Inn, and this is, what we're doing, and this is how we run. They say, yeah, but you're a nonprofit, so you have all these special things that you don't have to, you're not like us. So you can't compare our operations to yours, because people don't understand that it's actually more complicated to run in a nonprofit or in a charity. There's a general assumption that you're getting some favors. And so you're not really as competitive as the for-profit, and you're really not in the same playing field. So I thought, well, this is a ridiculous stigma. So why not just incorporate like everybody else? We have a for-profit has the most flexibility and structure. So with that, we've had to put some things in our bylaws and making sure, our governance has some structure around it. But our goal is to be an example for others and just structure like everyone else, but act differently, make different operating decisions, and use the flexibility of the structure and give the power back to sort of our management. And, I would love to see that we're all not just for profit entities. I do think we get caught up on the different language, but it's around, business-minded ways to better social ends. But that's sort of the evolution of how we came in it. So try to keep it simple, keep it transparent, keep it in a language that those you're trying to build relationships with, be it their funders or lenders or, other providers. Because it's got to be something that people can grasp. So that's what led us down to this for-profit, and keeping it separate from the charity. Then it just gave us whatever regulatory came down the line, or we just wanted to make sure that we had those kind of church and state completely separate. So we were prepared for the growth of the business, and we hope the business is going to continue to grow well into the future, and be much larger than our charitable program needs are. So we also didn't want to get into this size question of how much revenue can the business generate before it's considered offside. So that was another factor in our evolution.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because one of the CRA considerations when you have a related business is whether it's subordinate to your charitable activities. So if you're going to be growing to that extent, then that might be a limiting factor.
That's it. And Yvonne mentioned that there's not a clear, rules. I'm an accountant. I like rules, and, the accounting and legal environment generally has a lot of really tight structure, but that's an area that's still very open. So we chose to go a different route and just keep it separate so that we could grow, because we have big ambitions to grow. And I should just clarify, so it's a for-profit, and then our goal is to generate surplus every year, and we donate 75% of that back to the charity. That's deductible for our tax. Then there's a 25% remaining. So we do pay corporate tax because we also feel that we didn't want to be in a position again that we weren't operating like everybody else. We were getting a special out for not paying corporate tax or not, doing our fair share as a competitive company. So that's the route that we've chosen in terms of our profit sharing and sort of our reinvestment and keeping money circulating back in the company and donating as much as we can. You have to have the cash at the end of the year back up to the charity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, and I like how you mentioned that initially you tried to set up a bunch of different entities and that was just not efficient from a governance point of view. I'm wondering, Jane, it looked like you had some thoughts while Diane was talking, so would you just share some comments there?
Yeah, I just love the ridiculous stigma comment. That's absolutely true. I mean, it's so odd. Why do we call things nonprofits? Call them by what they're not. It seems like goofy to me. And what does a nonprofit structure mean? It means that you've told CRA that you're not going to pay out dividends. That's kind of all it means. When you really get down to it, that's the simplest part of it. So I love the rogues up in Fort McMurray actually now call nonprofits social profits, which I think is really interesting. Anyway, that's a whole thing. And yes, I mean, I do want to say, pay attention to what the legal rules are, that you understand them, but make them work for you. I've got a question actually for both Kate and Diane, which does talk to structure. We've talked about the legal benefits, but something that's really important for me is understanding who's going to drive the bus and who's going to make the decisions. And do you have an entity that actually can? Sometimes the slow, elegant process of taking something to the board just doesn't work in real day world. And I see a question about what is a legal structure that ensures that a rogue board can't divert profits. So yeah, so there's all those. So both of you, I thought as you were speaking, I was thinking about what's the size at which spinning something off from the program. Kate, you spoke about it starting as a program. When was that? And also, what about the relationship between your charitable organization or your not-for-profit organization board and the actual operating? You could speak to that, because I think to me, that's really critical and something I really drill down on when I look at somebody who wants to borrow money from us.
Yeah, for sure. So at the time back in 2008, I think Wisdom Plastics was probably bringing in, close to, between, $1 and $1.5 million in revenue per year, and then probably about, $300,000 to $400,000 in profit. So, and we had about, I think, around $2 million in assets on the books. And so at that point, the decision was made again to spin that off there. So yeah, so we do, have separate, either advisory committees or boards that look after the society itself. And then we have the board of trustees that again makes those decisions on the, driving where that income will go, and really keeping the LP on side in terms of that. We also have a business development advisory committee that is a subset of folks that work in industry in Alberta that provide us with that sort of advice as well in terms of the operating landscape and strategic growth and things like that. In terms of the management of the actual businesses, like we do have a director of social enterprise that is specifically employed by the LP, and so that manages and runs that business, who reports up to the CEO of the entire organization. So there's one CEO of the social enterprise that in conjunction with the board of directors of the society, steers that ship. Then we've got some, great advice on our board, and then we utilize. To sort of streamline operations, we utilize internal, corporate services folks as well. Like myself, I would do the accounting for all the entities. So, again, just keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, and I can jump in. So we have two completely separate boards. We have a charity board, and then I have a for-profit board. And the membership on those boards, the for-profit board has experienced business people that have advice to give us in terms of our growth and the specific needs of a series of social enterprise startups. And that's their mandate is focusing on that in the sustainability of those businesses and, maximizing employment and reinvestment. And then we have the charity board, and the directors that are on that board are definitely more focused on our programming at the Shorefast level. And so it's a completely different lens. So they meet separately. It's a complete, so there's two streams and two sets of records for both. And they do get together once a year for sort of an annual event that we have, but that is separate operating. And that's likewise with our management. So we have a team that manages the charitable operations. And then we have the majority of the staffing when we're open. Their big group is all housed in the business side for sure. And then we have a shared services division, similar, I think, Kate was saying, like the accounting and a lot of the, IT and human resources and that sort of our shared services. They live in the business, and then we do a charge back to the charity for their percentage use of those services.
Very interesting. Yvonne,
Another profit center.
Yeah. How important is it, as Kate and Diane were talking, how important is it to keep the boards and the management separate between a charitable entity and a for-profit entity that's associated with the charity?
Well, it's important because they are two different entities. So, one is doing one thing and one is doing another. So, if you want them to be treated in law and certainly under the Income Tax Act or for any other purpose as separate entities, then they have to act as separate entities. And as Kate pointed out, and Diane both, the business corporation has people who are keen and advisors in the business world and know what they're doing in that world. And the charity board is a different focus altogether. So you have different talents, different board matrix, skill sets, things like that. So it's important not only from the legal side too, and the perception side, but also from the actual operation side, as they pointed out.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I wish we could continue with this, but we are kind of running short on time here. So I wanted to give everyone a chance to just make some closing comments. If you each, I want to go around the table kind of and give you each a chance to answer this question. So if you had some words of wisdom to a nonprofit or charity that's setting up a new social enterprise, what would those be? We'll start with Jane.
Sure enough. Okay, I would say you already are a social enterprise. Sorry. It's not a new thing you bolt onto the side of what you do. Social enterprise is about taking everything that's learned within business and dealing in the marketplace and absorbing that and making use of it as you can within your operations. Yes, I agree that it's two very different legal entities with two separate boards, but my God, if the skill set between those two boards isn't needed in both rooms, I don't know what's true. Every business person, I sometimes despair when a business person goes onto a not-for-profit boards. It's like their brains fall out when they go in the room. It's things that they would not accept in operating their own business, they somehow think are fine inside the nonprofit. The nonprofit and charitable world needs that business discipline. They should steal everything they can and then temper it with the mission that they're trying to do, their role in community. God bless Milton Friedman, but he was wrong. Business is not about simply making profit. It's about a bigger mission. So I think the joy of social enterprise is that it says, take both sides, bring them together in the best kind of way that you can, and learn what you can from both sides of that equation. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Kate, what would you say as your words of wisdom?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with Jane more. It really is, over the years, Chrysalis has brought on more kind of business-minded managers to run both the nonprofit side and as well as the businesses, of course, and it's done wonders for both sides. And so, just having a CEO that even understands how to read and interpret financial statements is pretty huge when you're steering a ship like that, and especially as the larger you get, big or small. I mean, understanding how your business is doing from a financial perspective is so important. And it's I find most folks that are thinking about starting a social enterprise or have that sort of passion to give back to their communities and want to start a business to help a particular group of people out or their community is fantastic, and you need that passion, but you also need that business acumen as well. And so if you're not into the learning about tax and legal structures and things like that, make friends with people that are really from the get-go. And it's not incumbent on you as the person with that passion who has the drive to start this organization to learn everything you can about financial and legal frameworks. That'd be a full-time job, and you would never meet your mission, right, or your purpose. So network, get to know folks who have started businesses, who have run businesses. There's all kinds of resources out there for non-financial managers to learn how to interpret a financial statement, how to manage cash flows. All of that from traditional for-profit businesses is crucial, whether you're running a social enterprise, a nonprofit. So yeah, that's stuff that you might want to just kind of brush under the rug. Don't do that.
Yeah, really good advice. And Yvonne, you might be one of those people who they would want to make friends with as a legal advisor. So what advice would you have to offer a new a charity or nonprofit who wants to start a social enterprise?
Certainly the toolkit that IntegralOrg the toolkit that IntegralOrg will be coming out with soon will be a very, very big value for everybody. That's one thing. But second thing, know the jurisdiction you're operating in. So if you're operating in Newfoundland, you don't be looking at Alberta or BC-based legislation, for any inspiration. We have different jurisdictions because of our constitution. So you have to know really what governs you. So that's the other. And don't assume that any of these laws or regulations can't be changed at the stroke of a pen, of a budget pen of some jurisdiction. So, what's the oldest model we have that hasn't been changed very much in the last number of centuries? Well, that's the business corporation model. So that might be more stable than a charity model under an Income Tax Act, or a nonprofit or social profit, or whatever model that we're all thinking of when we talk about nonprofit. So always think about the future and think about getting the most stable structure you can that works, obviously, for your organization and the resources you have available to you to create these wonderful structures that work for you.
Yeah, really good points there. Diane, we will wrap up with you. So what would your words of wisdom be for a new social enterprise?
I would say, make sure you understand, what are you optimizing for? Like, what is the purpose of what you're doing? And then call it a not just for profit. Then figure out what it is you need to do. So I think it was Jane that mentioned, and Kate as well, what are your income sources that you need? So where is the money coming from? Where is the money going? So ignore legal structure first, map out all the cash. Who's it coming from? Do they need a receipt? Do they not? What's the source? And once you map out where the money's coming in and where you think the money is going out, the legal structure is an overlay on top of that. Accounting and all this legal, they're all tool sets. They're tool sets in your toolbox, but you better know what you're building to begin with, or it's just a big ball of distraction and you're going to end up in a bad spot. So I'd say make sure that you understand, and what is it that you're optimizing for? Is it for cultural renewal? Is it for employment? Is it for a health statistic? But be really clear on that. And again, I'm very focused on, where does the money go? I am asking that question. I'm, as a CFO, where does the money go? Where is it coming in and where is it leaving? The cash flow planning is really your roadmap, and put your legal structure on top of that. And then it will service what you need. And yeah, in terms of like, we're in the space of community well-being and community and long-term community benefit. We wanted to make sure that we could create community-owned assets. I think this is a very emerging space. We don't talk ownership that much, but understanding like, how do you keep money circulating in your organization or in your region, if that's what you're focused on? Who owns what? It's really important to understand the ownership. And so having a sense of legal is really critical. And understanding your inputs and your outputs. The money is a really big part of it. And I think everyone said here, I see it in the chats, make friends with lawyers and accountants. We're not as boring as you think. I think there's a huge opportunity for creativity. We've talked a lot about it's complex. It's very complex. It can be overwhelming. It's quite confusing. But once you get into some of the nitty gritty of it, there's also a huge potential of creativity in this space. They're tool sets. So again, each tool for different purpose. So you can think about, plugging and playing things with things to suit your need. But we don't really think of creative accounting or creative legal in that way. We tend to think of very box structures, but there's a lot more that we have to use for benefits. So I'd say, don't shy away from it. And don't think that there's not an opportunity to create something new. And Yvonne said, at a stroke of a pen, things could change. All of these rules were created by humans. All of these rules can be changed by those same humans. So we are on the verge, I believe, of some evolution in this space. So it's a really exciting time for the potential of what this can be. So I'd say don't be afraid of it, and find like-minded people that are interested in helping shape the future for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, couldn't agree more, Diane. And yeah, it's interesting that you commented on the importance of all those management strategic planning elements prior to selecting a legal structure. That's something that in developing our toolkit, like I've heard again and again. And that's actually part of the reason why IntegralOrg exists, because we're trying to bring that strategic planning side and the legal compliance side together to try to give a more holistic picture. So very, very good points there. And I think we have some time for questions now. So just a few minutes here. The first question I'm going to ask is, I think this probably would be for Yvonne, but feel free to comment, anybody. Can somebody speak to organizations that operate social enterprise activities within the social profit as opposed to a separate legal entity? So assuming that means a charitable entity or a nonprofit entity, what would that look like, if you weren't going to spin that off into a separate entity?
Well, I could just quickly say, from the legal, you have to know what you are. If you're a nonprofit, you must follow the rules to claim that exemption under Income Tax Act and follow all the other rules. And if you're a charity, there's a whole other related business guidance rules that you have to follow, created by Canada Revenue Agency Charities Directorate, interpreting the Income Tax Act. So those are the rules. If you want to do it inside, follow the rules. These people that we have on our panel, Kate and Diane, their organizations didn't want to do it inside for various reasons, so they're doing it in these structures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does anyone else have a comment on that, on running a social enterprise inside of a nonprofit or social profit?
Well, as I said earlier, I think that the principles, if you're going to take social enterprise principles of good business management, good financial, good legal understanding, all of those things, they can be applied inside of any organization. So as I say, I've stopped thinking about a social enterprise as a separate thing that you do that's not part of your daily ongoing business. I think you can benefit from all of the things that both Kate and Diane were talking about within your day-to-day operations, and that it can improve your stability and your sustainability as an organization. To me, that's what the really cool thing about social enterprise is, that we can all benefit from those business tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Another question, probably for Diane and Kate here. What level of revenue would make a social enterprise worthwhile for a nonprofit organization? So that would be like starting a business, right? So what level of revenue would that need to generate to make it worthwhile to set that up for somebody?
I think it entirely depends on what your mission is and what you're trying to achieve. As Diane said, if you look at where the money is coming from and where it's going, and how you're going to fulfill your mission, the level of revenue, I think, isn't the question to ask. It's how are we going to achieve our objectives? Coming up with the business plan, with your strategic objectives, what revenue do we need to pay our bills, to, satisfy the strategy or the mission that why we exist, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And then minimum compliance costs, I'd say that's the analysis. Okay, so to do an audit, if you're going to start out with an audit or a reviewed statement, you're looking like, depending on the size, but even small, it's like $7,500 and up just for your year-end, basic compliance. That's someone to put their stamp on your financial statements. Then you've got to hire bookkeeping, and you have corporate record keeping, filing your tax returns, administration, and corporation. So you're thousands in with a separate legal entity. So that's why I wouldn't take it lightly. It needs to be, I'd say, a material size of operations. If it's something off the side of the desk within the charity itself, if it is truly, subordinate activity or run by volunteers, then really start to think about when it's a separate entity, you've got oversight, staffing, you're starting something from scratch. So you're thousands in just to maintain it every year. Plus you've got to get it set up, and a lot of time that'll go in maintaining a separate board and those relationships too. So I'd say it has to be, I don't have an exact dollar value, and it depends how profitable it is or not in terms of the benefit, and how are you going to fund it? That's the other way. You've got to think about, if it's being funded by the charity itself, or if you're bringing an outside lender in, they may have something that they want it separated. But there is just basic compliance costs that get expensive. So it would be much more efficient for us to do this all in one. But it's a lot more work to run double of everything. There's HST issues between the two of them, and it's messy. But we felt that it was the best structure to give us the potential for growth. So I'd say you've got to factor all those things in.
The only partially frivolous answer is when it starts to attract the attention of CRA, then it's big enough to actually consider moving on. And that's the example that's used. Like Habitat for Humanity spun off Restore when CRA started going, this is starting to look too big. So that would be one of the things you want to talk to your excellent accountant about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but ideally you wouldn't attract the attention of CRA because that can be a bit of a headache to deal with, I'm sure. But yeah, all really, really good considerations there. Another question. So this is an interesting one. Any thoughts on the consequences of Me to We, the We charity, specifically on profit flowing from a for-profit to the charity, and how that was perceived by the public? Does anybody have thoughts around that?
Well, my general comment is it's an example, without being specific on this situation, it's an example of how transparent charities and social enterprise structures are. It's the transparency and the ability to search out the documents online and government sources. So whatever structure you're putting in place for your social enterprise, know that it's something that would be easily accessible and searchable by others potentially under the system we have now. So don't do something you wouldn't want to read about on the front page of the Globe and Mail, right?
That's fabulous advice. I did lay awake for a couple of nights thinking, how do I change the name of our fund from a social enterprise fund? Because I didn't think it was particularly good for the sector. What it does point out to me, though, is that there's so much confusion about this, and that there needs to be some work to clarify things. To go back to Diane's point, that some of this pretzel making is to actually be able to do what we know is the right thing that we want to do in community, but follow some rules that aren't really set up for this kind of work. So there's some thought that needs to be put into it at the federal regulatory level to sort this out and make it more clear for us.
Absolutely. Diane or Kate, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I agree on the complexity side of it. I think that there's, but I think talks like this and the tool set that you guys are looking to put out is exactly where we need to go, because I think it's a very emerging field. I mean, I worked in public practice for almost 15 years, and it wasn't something that ever crossed my desk until I came into the operational side, and I was like, wait, this structure has, I gotta dig into this more. And there's not a lot of professional advisory in the space of it yet, because there's not enough demand. Because it's like people, it just hasn't landed yet. So I think the concept of social investment, and I think we're on the verge of this, but then how to actually bring this to life and still abide by the rules, but put it in a structure that allows for growth and to optimize whatever your social purpose is. This is a very new conversation. So I think I'm excited about what's to come ahead, but yeah, right now it's a very limited group that has the awareness and as this talking point. So I think, yeah, we're just on the verge of it and much to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good segue. I think, yeah, hopefully there's some policy and regulatory changes coming down the pipe. But until then, I'm just going to share my screen again here for some concluding thoughts. Just a little plug before we wrap up. So as we mentioned, IntegralOrg is launching an online toolkit, which will be coming out in the next month or so. And it's designed to help users select the most appropriate legal structure for their social enterprise. So that's for existing organizations or individuals who are starting something up. We also have a workshop coming up on June 10th on the legal possibilities with social enterprise for charities. So in that, we're going to delve more into the details on the rules and regulations for charities and operating the social enterprise inside that entity. So keep an eye out on our website, IntegralOrg.ca, for more details on those. And I just wanted to thank our panelists so much. That was such a rich conversation. So many good insights were shared. And thank you to all our participants for joining. If there's any questions you had that weren't addressed, feel free to send me an email. My email address is on the slide there, Kristina@IntegralOrg.ca, and we will get to your questions that way. And again, IntegralOrg is here, so we know these are challenging times for the nonprofit sector, and we're here to support you in your mission. If you have any questions about social enterprise, this presentation, or just any aspect of nonprofit governance or management in general, please feel free to call or give us a call, and we're always available. So again, thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your afternoon and enjoys this beautiful day. So thanks, everyone.